Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Alta Sea Aquaculture webinar for May 27th. For 1 hour, we are going to be looking at the future of aquaculture. My name is Val Zavala, and I'm very, very pleased to be your moderator. As you know, I've spent, for those of you in the Los Angeles area, I spent 30 years at KCT Public Television here in Los Angeles as a journalist and news executive. I'm now retired, very interested in the environment, which is why the work being done at Alta Sea is so exciting. So before we get into our discussion about the future of aquaculture, we are going to ask all of you to do one thing for us. Now, this is important. And since you're already at your computers, you can literally do it live while I'm telling you how to do this. Alta Sea, get ready to click. Alta Sea has applied for a grant. It's a community grant from Council Member Buscaino, who represents the San Pedro area, where Alta Sea is. And we really want your vote so that Alta Sea has a better chance of getting this grant. So what you do is, there's not much time, by the way, so you just go to the link in the chat box. Jacob's put up the link. And it's there right now. So I hope you're clicking on it right now. We can all do this right now. Click on that. Then once you see it, once you go to the page, you put in your email address, and then Alta Sea's zip code. Alta Sea's zip code is 90731. So if you're there on the page where it says Alta Sea's zip code 90371, and then the all important thing is you click on the second option, which is Alta Sea at the Port of Los Angeles. That's your vote for this community grant. So you will help Alta Sea get this grant, and it'll be really wonderful. So it only takes 10 seconds. We're so appreciative of your helping us out. The second announcement is that there's a great opportunity for young people, the High School Summer Research Project. And if you're in high school, or if you know of a high school student who would like to be part of Alta Sea's Summer Research Program, here is their chance. Students will be studying sustainable aquaculture with Holdfast Aquaculture co-founder, Dr. Nathan Churches, or with graduate students from the Oregon State University's Pacific Marine Energy Center. This is a wonderful opportunity for young people. It's a chance for them to delve into the whole world of aquaculture. I guess you're supposed to say dive into aquaculture. The application can be found at altaseaproject-blue.org/high school. Jacob, I think you're going to put the that little link in there as well. And again, that's a school research mentorship program. It's due May 31st. So if you know of any students who are interested, that would be a great opportunity for them to apply for it. And the students' scientific papers at the end of the project will be published on Alta Sea's website, and they get volunteer hours as well. So it's a terrific opportunity we want to let you know about. Okay, on to our webinar. This is the final of 4 webinars scheduled in May looking at aquaculture. The webinar is being made possible by CSUN, Alta Sea, Beneficial State Bank, and the Los Angeles Coalition for Economy and Jobs. So thank you very much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Participating with us today is, oh, I'm sorry, I should also remind you, I'm going to be asking some questions, but I want to get to as many participants' questions as possible. So please put your questions in the chat, and Jacob will text them to me and I'll send them on. We'll ask them we'll ask the panelists as many questions from you as possible. With us is Brian Beal. He is Cooperating Professor of Marine Ecology, Research Director of Downeast Institute, University of Maine. That's funny, cooperating professor. I guess there's some uncooperating ones. I'm not sure. He's one of the cooperating ones. That's good. Dr. Beal is a professor of marine ecology at UMN, University of Maine at Machias. He teaches and does research at the university's main field station at Black Duck Cove. He graduated from UMN with a BS in biology. He has a master's degree in marine sciences from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a Ph.D. in marine bioresources from the University of Maine at Orono. Dr. Beal was instrumental in establishing Maine's first lobster hatchery and Maine's first public clam hatchery in 1987. He's known for his work with soft shell clams throughout the eastern US and Canada. In 2000-2001, he was a Fulbright scholar at the National University of Ireland, Galway, where he worked with Irish fishermen and researchers on ocean-based nurseries for cultured European lobster juveniles. There's one thing we know about science and research, it can be very specific. Also with us is Peter Bryant, the Senior Program Officer of the Walton Personal Philanthropy Group. Yes, that's the Waltons who started Walmart. those Waltons. He is also with the Builders Initiative, which was started by a third-generation member of the Walton family. Peter focuses on strategy development, environmental grant making, and impact investment opportunities for those two organizations. Peter is focused on ocean sustainability, including fisheries management, aquaculture, ocean conservation, and climate resilience work. He also heads an impact investing strategy, which is focused on early stage investment opportunities in businesses and funds that are aimed at improving our ocean's health. So he's kind of like the business investment side of this issue. He has more than 20 years experience in freshwater and marine conservation. He has managed programs on river conservation and marine fisheries for the Nature Conservancy and World Wildlife Fund, among others. He earned his degree in economics from Colby College and a master's in environmental management from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and he lives in Carlsbad, California. Welcome. And also with us is Dr. Cherie Chopin, I hope I said that right, was born and educated in France, as you'll be able to tell in just a moment, as he speaks so eloquently with that great French accent. He moved to Canada in 1989 and is a professor of marine biology at the University of New Brunswick in St. John. His research focuses on ecophysiology, biochemistry, and cultivation of seaweeds of commercial value, as well as the development of aquaculture for environmental sustainability, economic diversification, and societal acceptability. That's a good one. From 2010-2017, he was scientific director of the Canadian Integrated Multi-Trophic Aquaculture Network. This is an interdisciplinary network of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. He created his own company in 2016, the Chopin Coastal Health Solutions. He promotes a greener blue economy, the turquoise economy, greener blue, in which ecosystem services are seen and used as financial and regulatory incentives. Besides all of this, he's a knight in 3 orders of France. Now, I can't say this in French, so I translate it to English. The Order of National Merit, the Order of Academic Palms, and the Order of Maritime Merit. So that's pretty cool, a real knight. All right, welcome all of you. That's the most talking I'm going to do because I really, really want to get to your questions. And we are going to begin with Brian. Brian is professor of marine ecology at University of Maine. First, can you elaborate just briefly a little bit more on what you do? What is your work focused on right now?
Sure. So I teach half-time and I do research half-time. And I'm also the director of our marine field station about 25 miles from campus. The courses I teach are in marine ecology, marine biology. I teach applied statistics and experimental design and analysis. My research focuses on the ecology, natural history, and culture of commercially important shellfish. In Maine, that would be lobsters, clams, mussels. So I look at those animals. I'm a benthic ecologist. I work in mud at low tide, and I follow the fate of these animals that we culture for a variety of purposes, but stock enhancement, or what you folks have been calling regenerative aquaculture. And so that's what I do.
So do you actually get out there with your hands in the mud, getting your hands dirty?
In about, let's see, 12 hours from now, I will be out on a mud flat looking at some Arctic surf clams. Yes.
Oh, that's great. So nice that you can get out of the lab and away from computers for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Peter, can you tell us a little bit? The ocean sustainability it's a high priority for the Walton Personal Philanthropy Group. How do you see that priority actually manifesting as aquaculture develops? In other words, you're looking at the opportunities it has for investors as well as grants. Tell us a little bit more about what you do in your relation to aquaculture.
Yeah, so our office, maybe just a quick table setting, our office as a whole has a goal for or a vision of a humane and healthy planet. And our mission is to shift minds and markets for good. So when we think about oceans, we think about sustainably managed and healthy ocean ecosystems that are not only a pillar of global environmental recovery, but also a driver of economic growth and a foundation for climate and food security and human health. And so when you start thinking about aquaculture, it actually ticks a number of boxes, both from a grant-making perspective and an investing perspective. And within aquaculture, we refer to our program as restorative aquaculture. That is both producing sustainable consumer products, and those can be seafood products, but also food products and other consumer goods from seaweeds, like bioplastics or fertilizers or alternative fuels that are better for the planet than conventional products. And that also, if designed properly, can benefit the environment. And so what I mean when I say that is, you know, when you think of seaweed and shellfish aquaculture, it can potentially provide habitat or even enhance biodiversity benefits for other species. Oysters are really well known for their, you know, filtration benefits for, you know, for pollutants and nutrients. And increasingly, people are beginning to understand that aquaculture is hugely important for natural climate resilience strategies. You know, reefs can help protect storm surge and higher wave action and those sorts of things. And so we think of aquaculture as both sort of this provision of food and consumer products, but also under the right circumstances being designed appropriately in ways that can enhance the environment. And so we look, as an office, we look across that capital spectrum from grants all the way through to investment opportunities that will help to grow the sector, because it truly needs to grow in order to meet all of these objectives.
Great, we're gonna elaborate on that as we go along. Cherie, can you explain a little bit more what the meaning of this phrase is? Multi-Trophic Aquaculture. Right. Explain a little bit more about what IMTA, what is that?
Yeah, IMTA. It's when we combine different species that have different function in the ecosystems. So, for example, the fish contribute nutrient to the system, and the seaweeds will be able to reabsorb the inorganic, the dissolved nitrogen, dissolved phosphorus, dissolved carbon. And the invertebrates, the shellfish in the water column, but also the sea urchins, sea cucumbers at the bottom, will recover, assimilate the organic particles. So as a matter of fact, it's a system where some species release nutrients, and some species absorb the nutrient. And that happened when I moved from France to Canada. That was at a time where the salmon industry was developing extremely rapidly in Canada. And then the problem was, what do we do with all these nutrients? So there is two ways to look at them. Either we say, oh, it's waste, that's terrible, blah, blah, blah. Or we say, using the circular economy approach, we say, as a matter of fact, it's co-product. Because it's well known, you know, what is waste for somebody is gold for somebody else. So what is waste from one species is gold for the others, the seaweeds, the invertebrates that will recover that, and then you get extra crops.
So we're able to find a good use for the waste, which is also called, is the waste also called nutrients?
Yeah, so the waste at the time, people were calling them byproduct. But if you look at circular economy vocabulary, and that's, yes, co-product is, as a matter of fact, the seaweed, for example, they need the dissolved nitrogen, the dissolved phosphorus, the dissolved carbon, they need that to grow. And the shellfish and the sea cucumbers, the sea urchin also need these particles. So in the water column or grinding it on the sediments. But for them, it's food. So we have to be careful that these, what we call them extractive species, but the extractive species have to have something to extract. So that's what you have to be careful. If you have too many extractive species, you can create an imbalance. So we need to balance the systems. That's what is important.
Got it. Brian, what do you think the potential is for growth of aquaculture? Right now, I know you're focused on Maine. California doesn't have very much, and yet I think it's being looked at as potentially a site for more aquaculture. Do you see that potential there?
Oh, very much so. You know, aquaculture needs clean water, so that's the first thing. So you're not going to be doing aquaculture, you know, usually in areas that are closed or that you wouldn't be able to eat the organisms, if that's what your idea is about. But yeah, the question is, you know, can aquaculture happen in, you know, high density populations? And the answer is sure. It absolutely can, and it can function exactly the same way that it does anywhere else in the world. There's nothing special about Southern California and aquaculture.
But for example, there are times when there are warnings on the beach, don't go into the water because it's really dirty. That obviously would not be the kind of place that you could establish any kind of aquaculture. So it would have to be somewhat removed.
Yeah. Yeah, so as I said, you really do need, clean water, especially if you're raising, edible organisms. But, you could actually put, as Terry was talking about, you could put seaweed that you may not want to eat, but will help, clean up the system because of all the nutrients that are there. So, the restoration, the restorative nature that Peter was talking about, that's something that could happen. I'm just simply used to being able to put something in the water and being able to eat it. And that's been the goal of my, professional career. But, you can think of different organisms, plants and animals that would act in a restorative fashion so that you may not get all those, beach closures through time.
Mm-hmm. And what is the most prolific kind of seafood that is a product of aquaculture in Maine?
Prolific? Well, I mean, we have a variety of different species ranging from salmon to mussels. And for right now, the salmon aquaculture industry is the oldest industry in the state of Maine, with probably mussels and oysters a close second. Yeah.
Salmon, mussels, oysters, anything else?
And soft shell clams.
Soft-shell clams?
Wow. I would say the top 3 or 4 different species. We also can culture lobsters, and I'm dying to be able to do this in a setting where it's legal. But in the state of Maine right now, it's not legal to have animals that are smaller than a certain size. And what I've been doing is culturing lobsters to the size of a crayfish, which you can eat, but right now it's illegal to do that. So I'm looking for ways to diversify the lobster fishery, for example, using aquaculture. And we know how to do it, and it's on the shelf, but we're kind of mired in a political battle.
That's interesting. So lobsters right now are generally too small to be allowed to be part of aquaculture?
So there is no such thing as lobster aquaculture other than the work that we've done in our lab and in our field station. But the idea is that as we watch, landings increase and then decrease with increasing water temperature, the notion is that the lobster fishery is changing, and it's time to do some other things with lobsters that no one's doing because, state law prohibits the possession of an animal smaller than what they deem as legal size. And we're talking about lobsters this size and growing them to 6 or 7 inches, the size of a crayfish, and everyone can eat a crayfish. That's fine.
Yeah, because I think of lobsters as big.
Yeah,
really
well,
big.
yeah, but they have to be this big at some point in their lives. And the new thing is that we can play around with color morphs. So there's such a thing as a lobster that is blue, or a lobster that is half blue and half reddish color. Can you imagine what a blue lobster would be on a plate, a white tablecloth plate in Los Angeles or Tokyo? Yeah.
It'd be all the rage, I know that.
I do that all the time. And anyway, I probably will go to my death before anything like that happens, but it will happen. It will happen.
So Peter, what kind of interest do you see from investors? What are they interested in, and how do you sell them aquaculture?
Well, I mean, I think there's so 2 really important things have happened over the last year. And the COVID pandemic, for all that it's been horrible in so many ways, has actually been really helpful in many ways for people understanding where seafood comes from and the need to eat it more. And in this country, a lot of people were eating seafood at restaurants predominantly, and people, because restaurants were closed, were starting to learn to have to diversify their menus at home. And so seafood sales actually increased during the pandemic as a result of that. And I think it also, because flights internationally were reduced significantly, it sort of forced people into thinking about, where does my food come from? And I think for the aquaculture industry, it's been a potential opportunity to see a pathway towards more domestic production of aquaculture in this country, which is a really good thing. And so from an investment perspective, what you want to see is viable opportunities. And right now, the regulatory pathway towards broader aquaculture in this country is quite limited. States like Maine can do it in state waters, but there are limitations around federal waters for aquaculture. And so you've got to see changes, I think, in terms of how the government thinks about aquaculture. And one of the things that we've been trying to position folks to understand is that aquaculture, we're running out of space on land for food production. And the food production on land is extraordinarily energy intensive. And so there are opportunities associated with what we call blue food production that will allow for more climate friendly food production in oceans of a variety, a broad variety of things. Chicken is chicken, but seafood is so many different species. And so I think investors are starting to get excited about the opportunities that are presented with seafood production at scale is a potential means to meeting both climate and food security goals over the next 20 years.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The traditional agriculture on land is also meeting with tremendous challenges with climate change and soil erosion and drought. It goes on and on and on. To what extent would aquaculture be threatened or at risk from sea level rise?
Well, I think it certainly will. And their scientists, Cherie and Brian, might actually be able to comment on that certainly more than I would. But what I would say is that one of the great benefits of aquaculture versus, say, wild capture fisheries is that aquaculture is more controllable of the inputs. It is something where you see the ranges of fish stocks moving into colder waters. And so fish stocks that traditionally were fished off of North Carolina are now being found in New England. And those in New England are like lobsters are moving further down east. Aquaculture provides an opportunity to provide seafood in a little bit more like a farming environment, which I think potentially creates greater opportunities for sort of controlling the inputs. I would be foolish to suggest that sea level rise wouldn't have an impact on that, but I'm not scientifically savvy enough to be able to accurately answer that part of your question.
So maybe Brian or Cherie can do that. To what extent are foreseeable climate change impacts? How might that impact aquaculture? And can you plan with it, around it, for it?
Yes. Yeah, climate change will have an impact on aquaculture, but I think aquaculture also has to be innovative and adapt to it. And as a matter of fact, aquaculture can provide solutions. For example, when we talk about acidification, and I much prefer to talk about coastal acidification than ocean acidification. I don't think I will ever grow enough seaweed to change the pH of an entire oceans, but at the coastal level, at the level of a bay, seaweeds do exactly the reverse of what animals are doing. Seaweeds absorb CO2 and provide oxygen, and the animals do exactly things in reverse. And when you are absorbing CO2, absorbing nutrients, people are so focused on carbon, they forget everything about nitrogen and phosphorus, which are also very important.
Good point.
To understand ocean acidification, coastal acidification. But for example, by growing seaweed, the problem we see, for example, is with shellfish hatcheries. At the present time, the pH of the water is becoming more and more acidic, it's decreasing, and the shellfish have a hard time to calcify. So the little shellfish cannot make their little shells. As a matter of fact, if you, in the input intake of a shellfish hatchery, you start by growing some seaweed, the seaweed will do the reverse. They will increase the pH, and it means that it will be more basic, and it means that the shellfish will be back to be able to calcify. So as a matter of fact, it is all these interactions, that's multi-trophic, that's all what it is, interaction between species, one give, one receive. And if I can improve the condition for the shellfish by growing seaweeds, and by the way, eat the seaweeds, I think we can do wonderful things with the seaweeds and eat them, then we do two things. It's a win-win situation. We address a coastal acidification problem, and we get more crops, and we can eat delicious dish with salmon in a wrap, in a seaweed wrap. It's delicious.
And Val, I would add that in addition to ocean acidification, you mentioned the sea level rise, and that will definitely have an impact, especially on land-based infrastructure. But I mean, as Terry said, aquaculture is resilient to sea level rise because we need ocean water. So but the other thing that actually is kind of ahead of the curve in terms of its relative impacts is actually warming. We've looked at the effect of ocean acidification on soft-shell clams, which is the second most important commercial species here in Maine. And when we've asked the question, what's more important, ocean warming and its effects or ocean acidification and its effects, the answer is warming. And it's an indirect effect because this clam grows from North Carolina all the way up to Labrador. So it has a very, very wide range of temperatures that it lives in across its geographic range. But those warm waters bring other species that this species is not used to, like green crabs, probably the most important global invader that we have in the marine environment. And this green crab has been in the United States on the East Coast since 1817. And it didn't get to Maine until the early 1900s, and it didn't get way down east where I live until the 1950s. But it's here to stay, and everything can eat it, but it has such high reproductive potential and output that even though it has predators, nothing biological is actually keeping it in check. The only thing that keeps it in check is the weather. And as we get warmer and warmer, and we have winters like we've had the last few years where we haven't seen any snow. It's Maine, and on the coast we haven't seen any snow. It's a beautiful environment for green crabs, and they're taking over, because the water's warming.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So those are things that are happening with climate change.
See, it's never the things you think. It's like, well, they're fine, but then this other kind of animal can thrive, and now they're being eaten up. It's you can never predict because nature has got just the most unpredictable elements to everything that make the outcome.
And that's why it's so cool being a marine scientist. You get to see all this stuff.
Like, whoa, I never would have thought of that, and it's sure enough, it happens. So what, I know that actually somebody asked a question about seaweed, and we actually did a whole panel on just aquaculture for seaweed a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago. So there is that website that webinar if they want to watch that. But nevertheless, he's asking about the future of seaweed becoming an important food source. And I think a lot of other cultures eat a lot more seaweed than we do, but it may be a much bigger part of our diet in the future. Do you see that happening? And I can just start with Peter.
Sure. Oddly enough, I was eating some kelp chips earlier this morning, or this afternoon, and they're really good. There was a company that we were interested potentially in looking into investing in, and so we wanted to try out their product. It's fascinating to me. There was a program, I think last week on one of the network news programs around seaweed in particular, where they sort of talked to one of the panelists and said, seaweed is having a moment, isn't it? And it surely is. And there's a lot of excitement for a variety of reasons, food certainly being one of them. And I was also part of a conversation at the Change.now sort of global series over the past couple of days, where they were introducing startup companies in the ocean space focused on ocean's health. And one of them was a company that I know of, we don't work with them, called Akua, that is producing, I think they're harvesting out of Maine seaweed and producing a kelp burger that is absolutely delicious. I've eaten it. It tastes better than any veggie burger I've ever eaten before. And like I said, kelp chips, but also there's, seaweeds are being used for alternatives to plastics. So I think seaweed truly is having a moment. The big concern on our part is that You know, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of capital to start seaweed operations, but from what I've been told, there's a serious bottleneck in terms of processing capabilities. And so we've got to find the processing opportunities to meet the production so that the sector can continue to grow. And one of our impact investments was in a seaweed processing company.
Very cool. Yeah, I would say seaweed aquaculture is probably the fastest growing industry, marine industry in the state of Maine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you also have the problem with processing, that the bottleneck is at the processing stage?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the problem. Growing it doesn't seem to be, you know, much of a trick, but processing is, because of the infrastructure that you need on land to do it.
What do you see, Cherie? Is there a seaweed market growing in where you are?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, there's more than a few tricks to grow seaweed, or if it was so easy, everybody would do it. But no, some things that people don't realize with seaweed, just a few numbers. As a matter of fact, on this planet, in aquaculture, more than 51% of aquaculture species are seaweeds. We don't know that because 99% is grown in Asia. But we talk so much about fish aquaculture. Fish aquaculture is around 10-11%. Shellfish is around 28%. But seaweed is more than half of the aquaculture production. But it's mostly an Asian story, so that's why we don't know. On the remaining 1% is for the whole rest of the world. No, there's tremendous things. As a matter of fact, on our site, we have a website called the Turquoise Revolution. And we have one gallery where we put all the, last week, for example, we did bread with seaweeds. Tomorrow night, I am doing surf and turf. I am doing seaweed sausage with salmon, and everything will be sparkled with some seaweeds. We have a seaweed ice cream. We have seaweed butter. Seaweed beer. We have done 2 seaweed beers. So there's a lot of applications, but people don't know about it. I mean, in Asia, you don't have to explain that to people.
Right.
But no, there is certainly seaweed as presently as it's its time. The only thing I want to be careful is we have to be careful. There is also a tendency at the present time with a lot of hypes. And I would say, because I have been, I would see a child of what happened. In the 70s, 80s, there was a lot of hype about biogas at that time. It was called, from seaweeds. And we will solve all the problem because of the oil crisis and everything. And nothing was delivered really in the 70s and 80s. So for 30, 40 years, we were at the bottom of the wave, where it was very difficult. I saw it with my supervisors and everything. And then myself, it was very difficult to do research on seaweeds because we were told, oh, well, why do you work on seaweeds? Work on something else. But last time they promised us the moon, they didn't deliver the moon. So now I am saying, yes, I have been convinced for 40 years that we can do tremendous things with seaweeds. Let's be careful also on not promising too many moons. Like, for example, at the present time, everybody wants to sequester carbon with seaweed. It's not a permanent sequestration; it's a transient sequestration.
Oh, interesting.
Oh,
that's a good point. Yeah. Here's a question. Let's hope seaweed has more than a moment. But you're right. It's never. Things are never as simple and smooth as we think. The world is complicated. Here's a question from Steve. He says, how much has overfishing of benthic fish, I don't know that word, benthic fish like cod, compromised the possibility for green crabs to be held in check in addition to cold weather? So maybe Steve obviously knows a fair amount about this. How has overfishing of benthic fish like cod compromised the possibility for green crabs to be held in check in addition to cold weather? Do you guys, who wants to take that question?
Well, I think he directed it to me. That's Steve Dudgeon, and it's a good question. The interesting thing is that usually where the cod are, green crabs aren't. They're usually not as deep as the codfish. But the point that he's making is that we've overfished cod, and we have really an artificial ecosystem or a brand new ecosystem he'd call it an alternative ecosystem or an alternative stable state, where, you know, the top predator, the cod, what was it preying on? It was preying on crustaceans like crabs, like green crabs, but there's other species of crabs there, as well as lobster. And so for a long time, you know, there's plenty of cod around, and they're cleaning up on these bottom crustaceans, and now the cod's gone. And so what you have is a crustacean-dominated ocean.
Wow.
Led by lobsters and native as well as, you know, invasive crabs. So it was a good point. Yeah.
Boy, hard to get the balance right on these things.
Well,
My goodness.
yeah.
I know, so one thing or another. Let's see, this question I'll address to Dr. Cherie. Do you have an interest in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? You know, I see a lot of things by United Nations, and they're beautifully written and they're very idealistic, and you wish to God they'd come true. But, you know, how do they relate to aquaculture, and how can they actually be incorporated into aquaculture development? But first, give us a little bit idea of what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are and how it pertains to aquaculture.
Yes, the Sustainable Development Goals, that's the United Nations came with that a few years ago. There are 17 of them. I made a slide, maybe I can share it.
Oh, okay, that'd be great.
Here it is.
There it is. You just click on that. There you go.
Do you
I
see?
think we see it twice. Yeah, we can see it. That's good. Perfect.
Okay. So it's a little complicated. There are 17 SDG, as we say, Sustainable Development Goals. Some are about the biosphere, some are about society, some are about economies. And generally, the problem we have when we say we work with aquaculture, people always put us in the, you see biosphere bottom left. So SDG number 14, life below water. So they say, well, you're aquaculture, so we park you in life underwater. But as a matter of fact, I would like to show you that aquaculture addresses many more things than life underwater. So I will just go to that. We are also having an impact on climate. We talk about that, climate change, warming, ocean acidification, nutrients, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. We also have, we should not forget life on land, because some of the aquaculture is land-based and is in fresh water. So as a matter of fact, we have also an impact on land. We have an impact on responsible consumption and production. Like, for example, as we mentioned, this shift of diets, eating more seafood. That's part of what people call decarbonization, because production on land is quite carbon intensive compared to production of food at sea, which is less carbon intensive. So if we want to decarbonize, there is more than trapping CO2, but there is also changing our diets. We have an impact. So we have an impact on consumption and production. We have an impact on decent work on the economic growth. I think a lot of aquaculture is in rural coastal region, and these regions were losing people. Aquaculture has been able to keep people in this coastal region. So that's also very important, on decent jobs. We also have industry innovation on the infrastructure, of course. There is a lot of innovation in aquaculture. There is a lot of new infrastructure. What else? We have good health and well-being. Yes, it's important. And I think, again, talking about seaweeds, seaweeds are part of a healthy product. For example, at the present time, we work on one seaweed that seems to have anti-Parkinson disease property. So that's certainly something that is very important for the well-being and the health of people. What else? Quality education. I think marine programs, aquaculture, we should talk not only about that in university, but we should start in kindergarten to talk about the advantage of aquaculture. Gender equality, that's also something. There is quite a lot of women involved in aquaculture. So that's quite an interesting fact. Then zero hunger. you know, in Western world, we talk about eating salmon, but in a lot of other countries, it's not salmon, it's other species, and quite a lot of seaweed and quite a lot of shellfish. And that is very important for food security in coastal communities. And of course, at the top, we have also interaction, partnership of the different goals. So you see, aquaculture for me is, let's not park it in SDG 14. We have impact with the biosphere aspect, the society aspect, economy aspect. We have an impact on many different things and people don't realize. So that's why I wanted to show with SDG, it's very important. The UN is really promoting the thinking through providing SDG for the human population. And aquaculture, I think, is a solution at several levels.
That's amazing. I had not thought that was so well thought out. Let's hope they can put some of those. Sometimes you see the most beautiful graphs and they say, oh, we wish that they could actually materialize in reality. I have a question for Katrina. This is an interesting one. You seem to have captured people's imagination, Brian, when you said that, or when we talked about there's a lot of seaweed, but not enough processing plants. Katrina says, would building processing plants at the site of a seaweed farm help with the processing bottleneck? Why not build a processing plant for seaweed also on the water using a floating platform? That's an idea. You can take
it's a great idea. You know, certainly having a processing plant that's close to where you're, farming is ideal. You know, in Maine, that's a problem because we just don't have enough seaweed farming. We just don't have enough people. So that's a problem here. Putting a processing plant out on the ocean, that's absolutely a great idea. What we're talking about when we process is mostly drying the algae, and so you need a fairly dry space to do that in, and so I wouldn't put my processing plant out on the water. Just you're defeating some of the purpose.
Wouldn't probably get not a lot of it. By the way, how far out from the coast are a lot of these seaweed aquaculture areas? Are they miles or close by?
Oh no, the aquaculture, like our site in the Bay of Fundy, is very close to the shore. But yes, and we are working exactly that on drying. Drying is a bottleneck. Because what we have to realize, seaweeds are around 90% water, okay? And people are generally surprised, but a fish or a human is around 70% water, but seaweeds are 90% water. So we need to dry them because seaweeds, fresh seaweeds deteriorate within 3-4 days. So if you want to do fresh application in local restaurants, great. But after that, you need the first processing step is generally drying, because then you get better shelf life and then you can do other application. Yeah. But drying, yes, several tons. It's easy to dry a few kilos, but several tons at 90% water. We are just right now working on trying to find solution for drying.
More drying techniques.
Yeah.
Peter, I understand you use the term impact investing. What do you mean by that, impact investing?
Well, so, the traditional investing was looking solely at financial return. And for a long time, that's how the investment community measured success. Mm-hmm. Impact investing at least makes the attempt, some cases really well, in some cases with a lot of talk and not so much action, of trying to actually do something good as it relates to impact. And so when we think about impact investing, we think about investing in companies that will do good for the planet. And so for us, what that means, at a minimum, is that the company that we're looking at is willing to measure impact. And that can be environmental impact, it can be social impact, it can be governance impact in terms of equity and rule of law and other sorts of things. But at a minimum, they have to make a commitment to wanting to measure impact. That can also look like trying to measure the environmental footprint of their business in terms of water and energy production and transportation costs, things like that. When you look at aquaculture, another way to demonstrate a commitment to impact is to get certified as sustainable by something like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council or one of those other independent certification bodies that can verify that the practices are sustainable. And so for us, it's about really being committed to not only hopefully being a viable and profitable business, but doing good in the world and taking direct action to demonstrate that through measurement of their impact.
Now, you also give out grants, correct, as well as make investment recommendations?
We do.
So what are some of your more exciting grantees? Are they doing things in aquaculture, any of them?
Yeah, a lot of them are. I'll maybe talk about a couple of projects really quickly, just sort of touching on some of the themes that we've talked about over the course of this conversation. So one that comes to mind is, this idea that we need greater financing of good things in the world, and that philanthropic dollars are great, but they only take you so far. And so one of the things we're trying to do with our philanthropic capital is to grow the financial capital going into the sectors that we care about. And so we're working to help advance resilience credits and carbon markets for things like natural infrastructure, the role that mangroves or seagrasses play in halting sea level rise, or at least mitigating it, in mitigating storm surge and challenges from hurricanes. So we're trying to get the insurance sector much more interested in insuring coral reefs and mangroves with grant dollars.
Oh, wow.
We also, another example in terms of what I was saying about restorative aquaculture is we've got a grant with the Nature Conservancy and the University of New England in Maine and the University of Auckland in New Zealand to sort of look at the combination of mussel and seaweed aquaculture and when does that actually create biodiversity benefits, either in terms of diversity of species or abundance of different species. So there are a variety of ways that you can use grant dollars to help sort of open up the aperture for things that ultimately might be ripe for investment down the line.
Boy, that's really exciting, and I think that's a great way to look at investments instead of purely financial. We have a quick question. Seaweed seems to have captured everybody's imagination here. Giselle wants to know: is seaweed a good source of protein? Is there protein in seaweed?
Protein?
Anybody know the?
Yeah, proteins. Yes, there is around, depending of the species, it's around 15 to 20% of proteins.
That's not bad.
It's not bad. Yeah, no, it's not bad. And very low in fat, less than 1% generally. So that's a very nutritious. It's very nutritious. But one thing I would like to mention, as we were talking about the financial aspect, is yes, it's great to see this financial involvement because we are at the stage now, I think people are finally realizing the ecosystem services provided by nature and the ecosystem services provided by extractive aquaculture. And so far, people have focused on carbon, and its carbon tax. And I would much prefer to reward people that are doing good things. So I much prefer to talk about the credits than tax. And nutrient tax, nitrogen, we calculated, as a matter of fact, the nutrient credit that should be given to the seaweed industry. And after that, you can use them as incentive for changing regulation, for changing investment. But if you look at the total aquaculture, seaweed aquaculture industry, the ecosystem services are between 1.2 to 3.5 billion US dollars. So it's not insignificant. And then, because people focus on carbon, I say, you did the wrong calculation, because carbon is in ton, on nitrogen, on phosphorus is in kilos. So as a matter of fact, out of these 1.2 to 3.5, you have 1.1 to 3.4 billion that are for nitrogen ecosystem services. Phosphorus is around 51.8 million. On carbon, everybody talk about carbon tax, etc., is only 29 million. So as a matter of fact, there is much more money to be made in nitrogen and phosphorus credit, trading credit, than in carbon tax. And it's about time we do the calculation and we adjust what we are looking on financially, on the investment.
You're right, Peter.
Yes, there's a lot of talk about carbon tax, and we are preoccupied with carbon, but there are so many other greenhouse gases out there that are being ignored because of it. And just solving the carbon problem, even if we were miraculously to do that, would not just necessarily get us out of trouble. Here's my question for you. As we have a lot of young people watching these webinars, and they're all looking for interesting careers, and some of them don't just want to sit in front of a computer all the time. What would your recommendation be for young people who are interested in aquaculture, who are interested in marine biology or whatever? Is this an interesting area to get into? And what sort of entry points are they if, for example, you're not a hardcore scientist? What advice would you give people? We'll start with Brian, go to Peter, and then Cherie.
Yeah. Well, my advice is to just do it. Just find a place, attach yourself to it, and work with the folks. Ask questions. Get your hands dirty. You don't need a degree in aquaculture to be an aquaculturist. So my advice is that if that's your goal, if that's your aspiration, find an aquaculturist and just simply help.
Attach yourself to them and say, I want.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just like anything else. It comes with practice, and you build confidence, and you build your practice and your patience, and so there it is.
Does it help to like scuba dive and know how to snorkel, all that kind of thing? I mean, or does that not really impact that much the actual aquaculture experience?
It depends on what you're culturing. I don't dive, for example.
You don't?
No. I wear a pair of boots and go out in the mud. That's my marine biology career.
I guess what I would say about that is, I got a degree in marine policy as a master's degree, but I really think that the challenge that we faced with the oceans is that there aren't enough people working in ocean health related issues. And that's because they don't see opportunity or career looking at the ocean. They see something fun. And so if you're passionate about the ocean, whatever you do can lead into an interesting career path for the oceans. A lot of what we're doing with our foundation is supporting early stage accelerators that are oceans focused, that bring engineers and artists and marketing people and all sorts of creative types, because starting a business, it isn't just a marine ecology degree that you want. And if you only have marine ecology degrees, your business probably isn't going to be successful. So, having the engineers and the marketers and the finance people and the variety of folks as you're innovating and creating new ideas, I think it takes all types of talent.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that you will learn as you go and discover aquaculture, is that there's so many different trades that are necessary, and there's so many different types of people that have those expertise that you're right, Peter. I mean, just being a marine ecologist isn't what isn't going to work. You need people that can plumb. You need people that can be electricians. You need people that can get you out on the water. There's just so many different aspects to aquaculture.
But yeah, I think aquaculture, and when we put in place a few years ago the Canadian IMTA network, that was one of the challenge, is when we were approaching purely natural sciences agency, they were saying, oh, why do you talk about all these economics and social aspect? And then when we were going to the social science side of grants, granting agencies, oh, too much natural sciences. But aquaculture, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, is a beautiful interdisciplinary field. And that's what we need to understand aquaculture, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. You need biologists, you need economists, you need social scientists. And the beauty is to try to get together. We don't speak the same vocabulary, the same jargon, So there is a period of adaptation. I have to, when, you know, the first time an economist told me, oh, the externality are not internalized. I say, whoa, 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 what are you talking about? Because I am a little biologist. So can you explain me the externality are not internalized? But then, yes, it makes sense. And then when I talk about interaction between species, it makes sense. And when the social scientists say, yes, but does IMTA make aquaculture more acceptable by a part of the societies that doesn't want aquaculture? If you say, if we change practices, will it change the acceptability? We need social scientists. So for me, that's what has been beautiful is, you know, I started as a seaweed biologist, but now I am completely convinced that interdisciplinarity, the interchange at the interface of the different disciplines is where the solutions are. So.
That is so helpful to young people because, you know, they have a tremendous variety of skills and interests and natural orientations. So it sounds like there's an entryway for virtually everybody. Yeah. All right, my last question is, what would you like to see, what do you expect to see, say 10 years from now in your area when it comes to aquaculture? What kind of progress, what kind of vision do you have that, you know, that where aquaculture will play, what kind of role will aquaculture play in our lives, say 10 years from now? I'll start with Brian, then go to Peter, and then Cherie.
I would hope that it has more of a role than it does now. One of the problems in Maine is that there's no intertidal farming, and there's no intertidal.
What is that, intertidal?
So intertidal is the area between the high water mark and the low water mark. So we have tides that expose great large acres, hundreds and thousands of acres of mud and intertidal flats, they're called. And that area is off limits to farming at this point because of some arcane laws that Maine was attached to Massachusetts back in the 1600s when these colonial ordinances were passed. And it gives people who live on the shore the right to frame aquaculture in the intertidal, and they don't want to really see it in their view shed. So I'm hoping that for Maine, my hope is that in 10 years, those laws that, you know, these are the same laws that basically allowed people to kill witches. That was the time they were doing it.
That's how old they are, huh?
1641. Yeah.
Crazy.
So I'm hoping that those laws get changed in the next 10 years. That's my hope.
You know what it's like? It's like the water ownership laws in California. They are the most complicated, the most ridiculous, the oldest, and trying to update them is like touching the water issue in California is, you can imagine, it's like, don't do it. So same problem. A lot of the problem is not with the science, not with the engineering, it's with the laws.
It's with politics and laws. Exactly.
So true. Yep. Peter, your idea of the future.
I mean, I think this is going to sound overly optimistic, but this is the decade of the ocean. So I'd love to see a lot more food production from the ocean in ways that actually remove the stigma of aquaculture from, you know, an environmental ill to being an environmentally beneficial process. I think technology has gotten us to the place where aquaculture can be done in new ways, taking advantage of technology innovations to produce a really good, high quality, sustainable food source in an environmentally benign way. And I'd love to see a lot more of that so that all the countries of the world are both meeting sort of their food and protein goals, but also, you know, reducing their climate footprint.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Cherie, what's your thoughts on the future?
Yeah, I attended months ago a webinar, virtual conference that was originating from India. And there were different speakers, and what was very striking, one speaker from Vietnam said, we have too much shrimps aquaculture in Vietnam, we need seaweeds. And then somebody from the Philippines And I was very glad to hear it for the first time, that somebody mentioned it. They say, well, in the Philippines, there's some bays where we have maybe too much seaweed aquaculture, and we have to think about following periods. Just like also for salmon, there is following period, is we maybe should grow seaweed for 1 or 2 years and let the bay re-enrich in nutrients. So that's when I say the regenerative aquaculture need also to be regenerated. We need so as they say, yeah, in the Philippines, we should stop growing seaweeds from every 1 or 2 years to let more nutrient come back, and then we will start again. So I was saying, hey, Vietnam, you want more seaweed, but in the Philippines, maybe in the middle of your bay, put 1 or 2 cage of fishes, and you will have nutrients. And they say that's what is integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. But the problem at the present time is, if you look at fed aquaculture versus extractive aquaculture, it's almost 51% extractive aquaculture worldwide and 49% fed aquaculture. So you say, oh, you have almost the balance. But again, don't forget, 99% of the seaweeds are in 9 Asian countries.
Wow.
99% of the seaweed cultivation, so not the seaweed, but 99%.
Wow.
Of
So it's really concentrated in, I didn't realize so much of it.
9 countries. So as a matter of fact, it's not a balance. And for me, the future will be a more balanced aquaculture, where you have species providing something, species absorbing something, and you need to equilibrate them. And at the present time, we can do all kind of statistics, but you know, the means mean nothing. That's what is important.
So better balance, more variety, where it's grown and what's grown, and then better laws,
Yes.
for sure. And in the meantime, I think, you know, I think Americans and in general, people are very, very open to everything from seaweed to more aquaculture generated, you know, food. I just think there's an understanding now that we really have to change our way of eating, and terrestrial based food sources just are so problematic. So I think there's a great potential in aquaculture. And I want to thank all of you for bringing such fantastic perspective and stories and opinions to this great discussion. And I want to remind everybody that it has been recorded and will be posted on the Altasea website to be watched again, to be shared, to be drawn from. So we'll live on for a long time. And I can't thank the 3 of you enough for making this such a fascinating conversation. So
I want to thank you, Val, for making us feel so very comfortable. You've done a wonderful job. Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad. No, you guys are great. And I hope you all get to meet in person. I know a couple of you have, but I'm sure you would all love to go out for have a beer together and jump on some seaweed snacks and
eat some lobster.
All right, and as far as our audience goes, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your questions, and don't forget that this is the final in the aquaculture series, but Altasea webinars will still be coming along and offering great insight into all aspects of the oceans, which are the equivalent of our future. So thank you all. Stay well. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.